Hi everyone, welcome to another Plenty workshop with Love and Spoonfuls. My name is Sarah Andrus. I'm a registered dietitian. I spend most of my week working at Newton Wellesley Hospital as an outpatient dietitian, but I also enjoy doing nutrition classes in the community, and Love and Spoonfuls provides this great opportunity. So we are going today to be making a fried rice with tofu and broccoli. But instead of true rice, we're actually going to be using cauliflower rice. And cauliflower rice is fun because it's a lot faster to cook. It can come pre-packaged, which is what I'll use today. And it is lower in calories than rice and still high in fiber. So cauliflower rice is fun, and not many people are familiar with using it, so I wanted to make sure to use that. Another protein source that I'm using today that people may or may not be too familiar with is tofu. So tofu is essentially soybean mashed and pressed together. So they're very high in protein. They're actually a complete protein, so they have all the essential amino acids. And we're going to cook this up. We're going to roast it. You can usually do it two different ways. You can roast, or you can bake, or you can stir fry. But we're actually going to bake and roast it today so that we have more room on the pan. So what I have out in front of me for ingredients, first is the tofu. I get the extra firm tofu. What this means is essentially that most of the water is already out of it, and so it's less work for us when we're ready to cook. And another thing that I have in terms of veggies, I'm using broccoli, but really this recipe is very forgiving for whatever vegetable you have on hand. So it could be carrots, it could be bell peppers. I would say those are probably the two most popular, but you could also throw in some corn, you could throw in some zucchini. So pretty versatile there. I happen to have some frozen broccoli on hand, so I'm going to use that. And then for another vegetable, I'm going to use, I just got a big container of leafy greens. So this is mostly spinach. So you can use spinach, you can use kale, you can use collard greens, you could use bok choy. You can use kind of whatever green you want, but we'll stir fry that up in the end, just to add some color and some more veggies and fiber. And then what I'm also going to use for a little flavor is 1 garlic clove. Again, if you don't have any garlic in your house, that's okay, you don't need it. But a lot of us tend to have it back in the cabinet in storage, so we're going to use that. And then we're also going to use a sauce mixture of sesame oil and soy sauce. So I used light soy sauce because or low sodium, because soy sauce is really packed with a lot of salt, and we get salt in a lot of different ways. We get too much of it usually over the course of the day. So I chose to go with the low sodium one. And then for sesame oil, a little goes a long way. So it's a little bit more of an expensive ingredient, but you don't need that much. There's a lot of flavor in a very small amount. So we're just going to use a little bit of that today. And I've kind of mixed my sauces, so I'll get to that in a second. What I've also done before I started this video was I preheated my oven to 400 degrees, because that's how we're gonna cook the tofu. All right, so let's get started. So you have your container of tofu. You're gonna wanna first bring it over to the sink, and you're gonna wanna slit the top of it and drain out all the extra water that it's sitting in. So I'm gonna do that over here. So you just kind of wanna squeeze it out, still in its container, until most of that water is out. What's very nice about tofu is not only does it have a lot of protein, and it's a plant-based protein, but it also has a lot of calcium too. So especially older adults, when we're starting to lose some of our bone density, it's helpful to have things other than dairy that have some calcium in it. So what I'm doing next, so I put it out on the cutting board. I took it out of its package, drained some of the liquid. Now I'm going to take paper towels and I'm going to dab it and press it. I'm trying to get any excess water out of it. And that's because when we roast it, it'll take longer if it's still kind of soaking wet. So we want to get a lot of that water out. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. Some people will stack up books and heavy pots and pans and press out. If you get the extra firm tofu, you really don't need to do that because most of its excess liquid has been removed. So I just find that this is better. But if the extra firm tofu was sold out and you're just getting the firm tofu or the regular tofu, then you may want to spend a little bit more time on this step, really dabbing and getting rid of a lot of that excess liquid. Okay, so that's done there. So in terms of cutting tofu, what I usually like to do is flip it over on its end and then go down with a knife right through the center and then flip it back over. And then I go through and I cut usually about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch in width. So for this, it'll make about 5 rows. And then I go the other way, perpendicular to the line that I just made. So you're just making kind of 1/2 or 1/4 to 1/2 inch little cubes. So this is what you should be looking at. And now what we're going to do is we're going to put these on a baking tray. So I already have a baking sheet here, and I've lined it with parchment paper. If you don't have parchment paper, you can use aluminum foil. If you use aluminum foil, you will want to spray it with a little bit of cooking spray just so that the tofu doesn't stick to the aluminum foil as much. Parchment paper is a little bit more forgiving that way. Aluminum foil works just as well, but I would suggest spraying it down a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay these out, and just like if you were baking cookies or something, you want to spread them out a little bit, give them some room so that they're not touching each other. If they were too close to each other, what would happen is they would more steam instead of roast. And the whole point of this is to get even more of the liquid out to really kind of firm them up. And another is to get them nice and golden brown. And you won't get that. Oh, that's my little oven saying that it's time. And you won't get that if you put them too close together. Okay. So this is what my pan looks like. So now that the little timer just went off saying that the oven is to temperature, I'll pop these in the oven at 400, and these will go for the remaining of this class, so about 25 minutes or so. If you want, you can rotate them over halfway through, so you can set a timer for 10-15 minutes and flip them halfway if you want them evenly brown on all sides. I might not do that this time. The taste will be the same. For a lot of people, it's more of the uniformity and the look to it. All right, these in here. And again, what I was saying earlier is that you can actually stir fry these too. But because we have a fair amount of stuff going into the saute pan with the cauliflower rice and the broccoli and the spinach leaves, I didn't want to have it cramped, and to avoid having to use 2 saute pans, you can just put them in the oven. But both methods work very well with cooking cauliflower. Okay, so we just set a timer. Perfect. Okay, So the next step on the sheet that I provided with this class is to combine the sesame oil and the soy sauce. So I've already done that. And again, you don't really need to kind of whisk it around if you don't want. I just kind of took a fork and stirred it briefly. But the ratio is important, like I said earlier, because sesame oil is pungent. It's very strong, so you don't need a lot of it. Other recipes sometimes call for honey, nut butters, all those kind of additions to make it a little bit more complex. Those are also great. I would say this doesn't need any sweetener because it is a pretty savory dish. So we find a lot of sugar in other recipes and in other products throughout our day, and so it's really important to try to cut down on sugar, so you don't need the honey. If you're cooking for kids at home and they like a little bit of sweetness, you could add in a little bit of honey. The peanut butter or the nut butter, or if there are allergies, you could use sunflower seed butter. Those are also good. That would make almost more of a peanut or a nut sauce, right? So a little bit more of that kind of Asian cuisine, which would be perfect. But to limit the number of ingredients that we're using today, I decided to just go with the simple sesame oil and soy sauce because those carry a lot of flavor by themselves. To help a little bit with some more flavor, I'm also going to be using 1 garlic clove. So what I've done is I peeled off the skin before this video started, and I'm just going to trim the ends. And to mince this, some people have actual garlic mincers, you know, little pieces of equipment. You don't need that if you don't have it. You can just simply cut into very small pieces. Again, whenever you're cutting, use the claw method so you don't cut your fingers. So you want to make your hand into more of a claw. So that way, if your knife slips, you don't hit your fingertips. You just kind of go against your knuckles. So now I'm just mincing by going down in little movements with the knife and getting it into very small pieces. Okay. And scrape it off carefully from your knife. So minced garlic should essentially look like this. So it should be very small pieces. And you can either put this in the saute pan directly, or you can add it into the sauce. I'm just going to put it into the sauce for right now, so it's all in one place, because it's all going to go in together into the saute pan. Okay, perfect. So now we are done with the cutting board and the knife, so we can set that aside. Just going to rinse off my hands a little bit. So next, we're going to do the cauliflower rice. So I bought mine pre-riced. I actually got this one at Trader Joe's. Trader Joe's actually has, it's very inexpensive, it's ready to go, and I like their rice cauliflower. I think it's kind of the perfect size. If you are feeling bold and you want to do a couple extra steps, you can totally make rice cauliflower yourself. So you can just take a head of cauliflower and you can either put it through a food processor if you have one of those at home, or you can take all the leaves off and then essentially mince it like we did with the garlic clove to make it into small little rice size pieces. So that's essentially what these companies do. But what's nice is that it's just ready to go. There's no prep work. So this can be a very easy weeknight meal. That's the goal of this, is it takes 25 minutes or less to do this. So out in front of you right now, you should have riced cauliflower and then a cup of any of the vegetable that you want. Again, I chose broccoli, and this is frozen broccoli, and that will do just fine. because it'll cook up quick in the saute pan. And frozen veggies are just as healthy as fresh veggies. The only difference is the taste. The taste of fresh veggies are sometimes a little bit nicer, a little bit more complex, but the nutritional value is the same. So there's no worry about frozen versus fresh. For canned vegetables, you just want to look out for added sodium, added salt, and for canned fruits, you want to look out for extra syrups and fructose that they add to those. So canned is still fine, just make sure to double check the label on the back. All right, and then you also should have some sort of leafy green ready to go. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to add this cauliflower rice and the sauce to a pan. So I'm just going to cut this with a pair of scissors. And again, this recipe serves 4, so I used a 12-ounce package, but you don't need to just stick with the 12-ounce. You can easily double this recipe if you have 2 containers of tofu, or if you want a little bit more cauliflower, again, because it's not rice, it's a vegetable, you can double the quantity there, and it would still be fine in terms of your caloric intake for a meal. So what I'm doing here is I'm gonna first put in the cauliflower to a large saute pan. It'll kind of come out in a lump, and that's okay, we'll break it up. And then I'm going to take the soy sauce, sesame oil, and garlic and pour that in here. And then because that's not going to be quite enough oil or liquid, I'm going to add about a tablespoon of oil so that it helps to fully coat the pan. Okay, so let me turn on this light. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on medium heat there. And so what that is going to do for the next few minutes is it's going to start to break down and from its kind of frozen block, and it's going to start to brown. And once it's been cooking for about 3 to 4 minutes, then we're going to add in the frozen broccoli, and that's going to cook for a little bit longer. And then at the very end, we'll add in some of the spinach, and then we'll add the tofu at the very end. So you can just take whatever implement you want and just break this down. If it's still super frozen, it'll break down naturally on its own after the first minute. So I'm going to let that bigger piece just stay there. But it'll start to smell very good in your kitchen because of the sauce as well as the garlic clove. All right. Okay, so I'll just leave that there. So I'll let that go for another couple of minutes. Meanwhile, the tofu is baking in the oven. And so at this time, your role here is pretty minimal in terms of just eyeing the dish, right? So we're going to be adding in 2 more things, but it's not super labor intensive. So what we've done here also is typically fried rice has eggs, right? But instead of using eggs, the protein here is the tofu. So again, it's plant-based. All this dish is great for someone who's vegetarian, who's vegan, who has an egg allergy, that this works for them too. And then in terms of the versatility of it, again, anything that you want to use from your fridge that you have on hand is perfect. Okay, so in terms of next steps, I think what I might do is I might check on the tofu just so that you can kind of see where it's at right now and what we're kind of looking for. So it's been in for about 10 minutes already. And you'll start to see What I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of flip it over so that you can kind of see how it's starting to brown. So flip over a few of those pieces. So carry it over to you guys. So if you can kind of see, I'm not sure how well you can see, but it's starting to brown on the sides that are close to the pan. And so what we're looking for the next about 15 minutes is for it to further brown and get a nice rich color. Again, it's dehydrating. And then what will happen is that because it has dehydrated a bit, it will absorb more of the sauce from the pan. So what's great about tofu is that it will take on any flavor that you give it. So if you want to make it a dish that has a lot of coconut milk and curry spices, it will take on that curried flavor. If you're doing something like this and you're throwing a lot of salt at it and a lot of what's called umami flavor to it, so more of that kind of meaty, earthy flavor to it, it'll take on that. If you want to add a ton of spice to it and you're cooking with a lot of cayenne and pepper and maybe some jalapeno peppers, it will take on a lot of those oils and make it very spicy. So it takes on whatever you throw at it. And that's one of the reasons I love tofu, for that reason. Some people also ask about tempeh, and tempeh is fermented soybeans that are kind of mashed all together. And so it's a little bit heavier and denser, so it doesn't take on as much of the sauces, but some people like it for its texture. So tofu, we're going to be firming it up in the oven, but it's not going to be completely firm, right? It's still going to be a little bit softer. And so because of that, some people prefer tempeh because it's a little bit denser, almost like pieces of chicken or pieces of steak, anything that's a little bit denser that you might throw into a sauteed pan or a stir fry. So some people like that about tempeh. So it's really more of a texture preference than anything. Sometimes tempeh can be a little bit nuttier. Oftentimes they combine tempeh with sorghum or brown rice or millet. I've seen a lot of different grains that they've put in there, and that's nice too, but that lends a more nutty flavor to it. All right, so let's check. It's been a couple minutes. Let's check on our cauliflower rice. So now it's a lot easier to break down, right? It's just, let me show you. It's starting to really break down here. So see, it even kind of looks like rice. If you were to do this with rice, I would suggest brown rice, just so that you get the fiber and more of the nutrients. White rice is essentially just the starchy part of rice. They've stripped everything else out of it. And so that's why it's kind of a sweeter taste than brown rice, because it essentially is just the starch. Okay. So it's a little bit hard, I realize, to see how brown it is because you've added the soy sauce to it, which already gives it a brown color. But you will be able to tell that it gets richer in color in terms of its brown, and it's starting to do that now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the frozen broccoli. So this is about a cup. And any frozen vegetable will add a little bit of liquid to it because the ice crystals will release and provide a little bit more water to the dish. And that's okay. Again, this is on medium heat, so it'll evaporate pretty quickly. All right. So we'll let that sit for another 2 minutes and let that heat up. And then what we'll do is then we'll add some of the spinach to it, or again, any leafy greens that you have. Most commonly, you have bok choy added. And so that is, it looks almost kind of like celery stalks, but then it gets leafy at the end. And you can use both the green and the white part of that. The leafy greens, I often like to chop off separate from the white section of the stalk, because the leafy greens will cook a lot quicker than the white part of the stalk. But so if you were doing bok choy, I would say add the white part of the stalks to this dish first with the broccoli or with whatever other vegetable. And then when you would be adding the spinach in this recipe, I would add the leafy greens of the bok choy. Bok choy is sometimes a little bit harder to come across, but if you have a CSA or something that gave you a vegetable, I mean, this is a great dish for if you're getting one of those community supported agriculture shares, or if you go down to your local farmer's market and you just kind of grab whatever they have. You can really throw anything you want at this dish. It's great. All right, let's see. So when broccoli heats up, it gets a very nice, bright, deep green color. And so that's when you can tell that it's starting to cook up nicely. It's when the stems get kind of a richer color. Right. You can smell the garlic too, which is excellent. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to check on the broccoli again and see if it needs to be flipped over. Oh, that's great. So it's starting to brown on both sides now. You can see how it's starting to brown. I'm not sure if that color is coming up quite on this video, but it won't be a dark brown. It just will be a kind of light golden brown, and that's when you know that you're done. So it might be done even before the 25 minutes is up. So now, because that's getting close, I'm going to add the spinach leaves. So any kind of leafy greens, they cook down very quickly. And so you could put several cups of leafy greens into this dish, and it would wilt down to less than a cup. So it's a great way of getting in a ton of vegetables by just taking any leafy green and throwing it over a saute pan. That's why I love any kind of stir fry for that reason. And I bought this from the grocery store where it's just kind of pre-packaged and pre-washed. I find that even though it's a little bit more expensive than buying the lettuce leaves or the romaine lettuce or a bag of unwashed spinach, I find that I go through more of it if I get it pre-washed and packaged, because sometimes I will wash all of it myself and then it'll sit in the bag and it'll get kind of moldy and wilted, and I'll have to toss some of it away. So do whatever you think will get you to eat more greens. So I just find that this makes me eat more greens because it's just grab and go. So I think that that's really helpful to take into account when you're going grocery shopping and thinking about the cost of things. If you were to buy something that's cheaper, but then you ultimately end up throwing half of it away, then it's the same price essentially as something that started a little bit more expensive, but you went through all of it throughout the week. So that's something to keep in mind that I like to talk about with grocery shopping. All right. So again, this is going to start wilting up. very quickly. So you just want to toss around the rice on top, or the cauliflower rice, on top of the leafy greens to get them to wilt a little bit. Surround them with some heat. So I'll show you what this looks like, just because I don't have equipment to show you. So you can see that this is really starting to wilt in here. And that looks perfect. So what we're gonna do now is, now that the tofu, I think, is just about ready. Yeah. So now that the tofu is ready, I'm gonna take this out and I'm going to add it into the stir fry pan. That way the tofu gets all the sauces and all the spices in there. And then you can either serve it immediately, or you can keep it in the fridge up to 4 days. So again, you can make an extra batch. This serves 4. If it's just you, then you have 3 other meals for later in the week. Excellent. Okay. So what I might do for ease of getting this in is, you can just move the tofu around, and then I'm just going to lift up this parchment paper and dump it right in to the saute pan. Perfect. And then there's really no cleanup there, because I just threw away the parchment paper or the aluminum foil, whatever you're using, and then you don't even have to wash this baking sheet, which is perfect. All right. So I've turned off the oven. Right. The tofu is now in here, and it's stirring up with the other spices, the sauces, and it will finish getting a little bit of browning in here in this pan. Again, still just on medium heat. So I hope that you can see that this was pretty minimal in terms of labor. So the only thing that I chopped was the tofu and 1 garlic clove. So everything else was just take out of the bag and put directly into the saute pan, the broccoli, the spinach, the cauliflower rice, and then the soy sauce and sesame oil. You didn't even need to dirty a separate bowl if you wanted to eyeball how much you're putting in, or just pour over with the spoon that you're stirring the dish with. So really the only thing that I'll need to clean is this saute pan, which is my kind of cooking. I love one pot meals where you just have 1 or 2 things to wash and that's it. Especially if you don't have a dishwasher or something, it's definitely better to have fewer dishes. All right, so this is done. So let me show you what I'm looking at. So this is the rice, the veggies. The tofu is kind of this golden brown, if you're able to see that. And so really just divide this up into 4 servings. And then you can top with whatever you want. Some people top with a little bit of lime juice and cilantro. Some people top with grated carrots. Others, if you want a little bit of crunch, you could top with some seeds or some, you could top with a little bit of fried onion, but just be mindful of the portion size there, because that still is a lot of oil. But if you want a little bit of crunch to it, you could do that as well. But then we're all set. So I hope you enjoyed this and maybe learned something new. That's the part of the point of these, and bon appetit.